We're in the Madison River Canyon, just west of Yellowstone Park, and this is Earthquake Lake, the enormous lake created by the 1959 Yellowstone earthquake. The side of the slide, that was the greatest damage area of the quake, is just ahead of us to the west. The roar you hear is a Trailways bus. There's Pat, who wouldn't get out of the car. And Beth. Katie's here climbing on the rocks with me. Well, I gotta go rescue Katie.
Kate, other side.
I mean, the top of my last pitch or just the whole top?
The whole thing just, you know, like if you build a sand castle. On top of the mountain, you'll see a shiny ray of taller rock. Well, that type broke loose, and this whole mountainside came down. This mountainside came down at a speed of over 100 miles an hour in just 8 seconds. And it buried this river canyon up to 400 feet deep of rock, debris, and timber. The whole mountain actually came all the way down and over. Now the visitor center is built on top of the mountain that came down. 80 million tons of rock came crashing down that night. I know that's hard to visualize. How much is 80 million tons? Well, for example, you could fill the Rose Bowl Stadium 10 times with the amount of rock that came crashing down. Or you can build a 2-lane highway from here to New York with 3 feet of surface. Or another way to look at it, you can fill 1/5 of the Panama Canal with the amount of rock that crashed down that night. Because that rock came down so fast, it caused strong winds through the river canyon that night. It actually blew cars and it blew campers. Also, when this mountainside came down, it blocked the Madison River, and that's when the river began backing up, and how Earthquake Lake formed and how Earthquake Lake got its name. Actually, there was survivors that witnessed this 30-foot wave of water that went up against the river channel. Now, Rock Creek Campground is now a mile to the east of us here, and it's 100 feet underwater, and 7 people died at Rock Creek Campground. 19 people who were camped along the river here are now buried underneath the mountain when the mountain came down. 2 people died at Cliff Lake, and Cliff Lake's over in the Beaverhead National Forest. It's 8 miles west of us here when they were crushed by a boulder. And it was sad, over at Cliff Lake, it was the Stryker family from San Mateo, California. And Mr. and Mrs. Stryker had their tent set right next to their picnic table. And it just so happened that night a boulder broke loose, skipped right over their picnic table, and landed upon Mr. and Mrs. Stryker and crushed them. And their sons that were camped a few yards away survived. So it was 2 at Cliff Lake, 19 people are buried underneath the mountain. And how we got that 19, they were known to be camped in this river canyon. They were reported missing and never returned home. And then 7 at Rock Creek Campground for a total of 28 people that died from the '59 earthquake. Now, as I mentioned, it was a busy night for campers in this river canyon. So there were over 250 survivors, and those survivors were trapped. If they ran to their car and tried to drive out of this river canyon, well, that was impossible. Because if they jumped in their car and they started to head west along the highway, well, the mountain came down and buried the highway. If they tried to drive towards West Yellowstone, that was also impossible. Because I'll tell you what happened down the road. If you go another 6 miles east of us here, you're going to come to a larger lake, and that lake's called Hebgen Lake. Now, Hebgen Lake has been here since 1950 when they built the Hebgen Dam, and they dammed the Madison River. However, on the night of the earthquake, the north shore of Hebgen Lake dropped 19 feet. So the highway along the north shore dropped right into the lake in 3 places. So it was impossible to escape heading east along the highway. And I give this example about Hebgen Lake. Say you're holding a big pan of water, and this represents the lake, and this side's the north shore. You're to take that pan of water and drop it like this. Well, of course, all that water would come over onto this side and slosh back and forth. That's what happened in Hebgen Lake. Those people who had cabins on the north shore, they were submerged underwater, and the south shore rose. Now, this caused great big waves of water that are known as seiches that lasted for almost 11 and a half hours in Hebgen Lake. Now, what was amazing, Hebgen Dam held during this '59 earthquake. In fact, the foreman of the Hebgen Dam woke up when the earthquake happened, and he witnessed these great big waves of water cresting over his dam. Actually, the ground around the dam dropped 9 feet. Now, can you imagine those people that were camped here that night in the river canyon? They had no idea how stable that dam was upstream from them. Not only that, the constant noise that night in this river canyon from boulders that kept on coming down from the mountainside. There were thousands of aftershocks. There was so much dust and debris in the river canyon that night, people had a hard time seeing a few yards in front of them. Not only that, with the river being blocked and the water rising very fast and very high, some of their campsites were soon underwater. So for those people that survived and were trapped, they decided they better get up to high ground and avoid these rising waters. Now, most people arrived at a high hill we now call Refuge Point. And Refuge Point's 4 miles east of us here. Now, most of those people arrived at Refuge Point, they had no shoes on their feet because they were sleeping at the time, and here they are, they jumped out of their sleeping bag and tried to get to high ground with no shoes on, climbing over debris in the river canyon. Not only that, they were in their pajamas were probably blown right off them from these strong winds that came through when the mountain came down. And many people arrived at Refuge Point, they were missing members of their family. So they just huddled around this high hill and shared, if it was a blanket, an article of clothing, and just waited and hoped to be rescued. Well, the following day, Forest Service smoke jumpers based out of Missoula, Montana, they parachuted into the river canyon. They jumped out of airplanes, and then they set up radio communication, and they started to give first aid. Now, anyone that was severely injured from this earthquake, they actually airlifted out of the river canyon by helicopter. The Highway Department, the Sheriff's Department, and the Red Cross arrived the following day, and they had all the survivors evacuated by the night of the 18th. What they did, they quickly bulldozed roads along the north shore of the lakes, so cars were finally able to drive on out of the river canyon. So they had all the survivors evacuated by the night of the 18th, but now they had a problem. They had this new lake forming, and they were concerned, would this water pressure build up, and would it all give away at once and then flood the Madison Valley? So that's when they brought in the U.S. Corps of Army Engineers. And it took 150 men that worked night and day for 3.5 weeks digging out this spillway channel. That looks like that big trench on the other side of the highway there. As soon as that was completed, the water in Quake Lake dropped 50 feet, and now the Madison River continues to flow through here. Now you can look out and see how deep Earthquake Lake used to be. Well, this time of the morning it's a little hard because of the shadows, but right at the bottom of the green trees, right at the bottom of their trunks, it almost looks like a line above the lake. Now that's the old water marker. And at its deepest, Quake Lake was 190 feet deep. Today the lake's 100 feet deep. Exactly 1 year after the earthquake in 1960, the U.S. Forest Service dedicated that big boulder up on the hillside. We call that our memorial boulder. And there's a bronze plaque, and it has the names of the 28 people that lost their lives. Now, those 2 big boulders are made up of the rock dolomite I was talking about earlier. And those 2 big boulders, they came over from this mountainside. They're just pushed over in force the night the earthquake happened. Now, this area is still a very active earthquake area. In fact, we're second to California in the lower 48 as far as earthquake activity. You get about 1,000 tremors here a year. Most of those tremors are small. However, last summer we had 10 earthquakes that ranged from a 3.0 to a 3.6 right here in the river canyon. Now I'll tell some survivor stories and then I'd be happy to answer some questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Look how well it's started over here from.
Why doesn't cheese have the stone in it?
No, they don't. Beth asked.
They're talking about they're going to try and get to get one. You get the girl to sign the book.
It's okay. Sorry. So we're doing now. It's a big town. As you know this. Okay.
And that was still floating here in 1974 when Pat and I came out to see it.
Yeah, today we're taking
I can't believe.
Well, hard to breathe up here, huh, Beth? Here's the memorial plaque on the side of the boulder.
Read the names. I can't see them. They're so high up.
They didn't climb that tree, they climbed trees down in the valley.
Oh, they
Now you
can't.
can see the large boulder.
They camped down in the valley. They camped in the valley.
Yep, they were camped in the valley. There's the spillway. Now if we walk over on the other side, you can see why this was this popular camping spot. People were coming out of the dry prairie into this beautiful tree-lined valley.
Look at those beautiful motorcycles. Reminiscent of our last summer vacation. Dad, was this the parking lot?
What? No, that's a new parking lot. That's,
Look at all the cracks in it.
well, they have earthquakes here and they have frost and everything else.
You mean they have earthquakes here still?